Alright, so in this video I want to talk to you about how to make simple arrangements for the guitar. And when I say simple, I mean arrangements that you're not going to go out and play in the concert or in a recital, but ones you might play just to impress somebody because it's a song that they actually know, as opposed to many of the other songs, unfortunately, in the guitar repertoire. So the song used as an example in this video is going to be a song that nobody knows by a band that nobody knows, just to play it safe, and that would be Here Comes the Sun by the Beatles. So if you're not familiar with it, go look it up. Okay, so now that you're familiar with the song, we need to talk about the three parts of any arrangement, and that would be the melody, the harmony, and the overall accompaniment. With those things combined, we can start to craft our arrangement. So we're going to do this in 3 steps. Step number 1 is you need to figure out what a guitar-friendly key is. You don't want to get halfway through and realize that some chords just don't work on the guitar. So what makes a guitar-friendly key is actually very much connected to the 3 things I said earlier. It's connected to the melody purely because of where does it sit, right? Does it use a lot of sharps or flats, for example? Does it make you jump octaves a lot, right? If it has a song that has a wide range, it might not be the best choice to do for your first arrangement. And maybe doing one with a smaller range would be a little bit easier, like we're going to be doing in this video. Another thing that would make something more guitar-friendly is something that uses open strings. We'll get more to that later. So the reason why I'm using Here Comes the Sun as the example for this video is exactly because of the reasons I just said. Number 1 is in the key of A, which only has 3 sharps, and actually it works on the guitar very well, even if you hate rooting sharps. Number 2 is because the melody sits very well. It's not too high, it's not too low, and it's kind of in the general mid-range of the guitar, which means it doesn't force you to jump up out of first position if you don't want to leave it. And number 3, because you're going to see that the chords that are used in the song line up with the open strings of the guitar very easily. Obviously it has the chord A, because we're in the key of A. It's going to have a D chord, which works pretty well, especially because we have an open D string. And it also has an E chord, which obviously works really well because we have an open E string. So step number 2 we kind of already talked about, but that would be to get familiar with the melody and figure out where you're going to play it. Because as you know, we can play the same exact note here, 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 and then that goes for a lot of the other notes on the guitar as well. So I'm going to go ahead and play the opening bit just so you get an idea of how the melody sounds on the guitar, and then I'll talk about why I did that. So I'm going to do it down in the first position, right? The first note's going to be a C sharp as you see on the screen, and the opening melody goes something like this. So it's not the hardest melody in the world, but it sounds nice. So the reason why I'm choosing to do it down there is because it keeps you in one position the whole entire time. But number 2 is because it's pretty close to the open chord shapes that many people know. And that makes it a lot easier when we want to add in our accompaniment, as we will later. So when you first start making your own on-the-spot arrangements, as I like to call them, you definitely want to do it with a song that you're pretty familiar with. Even if you have the sheet music in front of you, it's going to make it a lot easier if you know the melody super well and you can kind of just more or less pick it out by ear and use the sheet music more or less as a guideline as opposed to something that's dictating you of exactly what to play and when. And finally, step 3, which is probably the most complicated part, which has to do with actually adding in the chords and deciding where you're going to play them and what you want to do. So let's take a look at what we got. So the first few notes is a C sharp, a B, a C sharp, and an A. Now the chord that's being played under it, as you can see, is an A chord, the one that everyone knows, something like this. So now you might not want the whole entire chord because that might be a little distracting, but that would sound something like this. So it works, but maybe let's start simpler. So what I like to do is I like to often have the thumb playing a bass line throughout of the notes of the chord, preferably the lower ones, that way it doesn't interfere with the melody by being too close in range to it. And that way when we get to the later parts, I can add the full chords in there to make it sound even more exciting. So what I might try for this opening bit would be something more like this. It's a lot simpler, but it's just as effective in my opinion. Let's keep going. So the next chord that we have is a D major 7. Now I'm going to go ahead and drop the 7th and just focus on the D and the F sharp because the melody that it's being paired with is the same thing as before, a C sharp, a B, and an A. So now I could do the D note on the open 4th string, but I'm going to go ahead and do it actually on the 5th string instead, so that way I have the F sharp just in case I need it. So I might do it something like this. So the next chord that you see is a B7 over D sharp. So right away I'm going to go ahead and scratch the D sharp and I'm going to go ahead and mostly focus on the B note. So because I left off with finger 2 playing the A over here, I have finger 1 free to actually grab that B. And I already have finger 2 there to play the next A, and then I can go ahead and play the open B, and then the A one more time. And finally we have our home chord, which is A, which is being paired with the notes C sharp, B, and A, very similar to the beginning. And for that, I might just do something like this. Okay, so if we put that all together, we end up getting something like this. Okay, so like I said, it's not the most complex or most interesting arrangement that's ever been made, but like I said before, it gets the job done by getting this point of the song across, and that's kind of the goal right now. But if you wanted to take your arranging to the next step, one thing I might suggest for you to do would be to revoice some of the chords. For example, instead of playing the A chord over here, you might want to try maybe playing it over here. Or maybe you want to play it like this. Unfortunately, I can't go into much detail other than that in this quick video, but one thing I would recommend for you to do if you want to get better arranging even from here would be to go check out other people's arrangements. That way you can see what they're doing. You might see things that you like but just didn't think of. You also might see things that you didn't think of that you don't like, and it will just save you some time. Either way, it's going to help you out. Now, getting better at arranging, just like practicing the guitar, is going to take time. It's not something that you can do just like that and magically be good at it. So go out, make some arrangements, and I hope you found this video helpful.
Hola a todos de nuevo. En este tercer vídeo quiero hablaros y continuar un poco con la tendencia de música española, su historia, las características, y quiero hablar de unos bailes o palos flamencos que podemos encontrar en la música española. Además quiero escoger unos ejemplos que tenemos en la música de Regino Sainz de la Maza, que compuso, entre otras obras, estas tres que se llaman peteneras, rondeña y zapateado. Y quiero poner ejemplos de cómo estos bailes o palos han evolucionado o de dónde vienen y aplicar algunos ejemplos en la obra de Regino Sainz de la Maza. Quiero empezar con la rondeña. La rondeña es un palo flamenco que está metido dentro del grupo de los cantes de Málaga. Y os preguntaréis, ¿qué es el palo? El palo es el nombre que se le da en el flamenco a las diferentes formas musicales tradicionales. En el flamenco hay diferentes tipos de rondeña. Una que son las rondeñas dentro del mundo del cante y otra la rondeña dentro del mundo de la guitarra. Vamos a centrarnos más en este segundo tipo porque nos interesa y nos pilla más de cerca. Quería destacar la rondeña en el siglo XIX porque hay una persona que empuja mucho esta forma musical y es Julián Arcas, que quizás nosotros lo conocemos por su contribución en el mundo de la guitarra clásica, pero no hay que dejar de lado también su faceta a la hora de componer palos flamencos como es la rondeña. Después, en el siglo XX, el precursor o la persona que ensalzó esta forma musical es el guitarrista Montoya. Otro de los puntos en los que quería hacer hincapié hablando de la rondeña es en la afinación. En el flamenco lo que se suele utilizar es la escordatura bajando la sexta cuerda de mi a re y también bajando la tercera cuerda de sol a fa sostenido, por lo que podemos tener la tonalidad de re mayor de una manera más sencilla. Y ahora, trasladando esta información a la rondeña que encontramos en Regino Sainz de la Maza, vemos también que la afinación está en re. La procedencia del nombre rondeña se dice que puede venir porque se originó en la serranía de Ronda, que está localizado en el sur de España, en la región de Málaga. Y otra corriente dice que se creó porque se recitaba la música en las rondas de la noche. Hay esas dos corrientes y no sabemos con certeza cuál de las dos es más veraz. Ahora voy a hablar también de la petenera, otro palo flamenco El origen también es un poco confuso. Hay una tendencia que dice que tiene origen sefardita y eso quiere decir que los judíos que estuvieron en la península ibérica hasta el siglo XV tuvieron mucha influencia en la creación de la petenera. O la otra corriente es que la petenera es originaria de una ciudad gaditana, de Cádiz, de Andalucía, que se llama Paterna de la Ribera. Otra vez nos encontramos con la incertidumbre y con el origen incierto de estos palos flamencos que son tan antiguos. Respecto a la petenera, quiero mostrar un ejemplo de los acentos que marca este palo flamenco y trasladarlos al comienzo de la obra de Regino Sainz de la Maza. Podemos ver que los acentos están marcados de la siguiente forma: 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Y empieza otra vez el mismo ciclo. Ahora voy a trasladar esto al comienzo de la petenera de Regino Sainz de la Maza. Y terminamos con el zapateado, uno de los bailes más conocidos e interpretados. El zapateado también fue muy cultivado en países de habla hispana y esta interacción de España con países de al otro lado del Atlántico, como son México o otros países de Sudamérica, se dice que ayudó a la transformación y a la concepción de lo que ahora conocemos en España el zapateado flamenco. No es de extrañar que en países como México, que he nombrado anteriormente, también tengan su propio zapateado. El nombre de zapateado viene de la palabra zapato y es que está muy relacionado con el baile y con lo que el bailarín produce al golpear sus zapatos en el suelo y escuchar los diferentes acentos que esto crea. Si me centro en el zapateado español, es un tipo de danza y música folclórica de origen andaluz, de la región del sur de España, mayormente en compás de 6×8. Si ahora vemos este ejemplo en el zapateado de Regino Sainz de la Maza, vamos a ver que también está construido en un compás de 6×8 y veremos dónde están localizados los acentos. Bueno, todo esto ha sido el vídeo de hoy. Espero que os haya gustado y hayáis visto la relación que existe entre el folclore y composiciones de músicos españoles como Regino Sainz de la Maza.
In the classical period, we witnessed the first real meteoric rise of the classical guitar as we know it. The guitar method shaped the guitar and new virtuosity in performance is created. There was a return to a more simple approach to harmonic structure, showing the clarity of 1/4/5, and there was divisions made: solo versus orchestra, instrument family versus instrument family, melody versus accompaniment. Different forms and genres came to the forefront, none more so than opera. The emergence of opera as the most popular form of music sent ripples throughout all of Europe, and it is no surprise that its impact was felt deeply among the guitar composers of that time: Aguado, Carcassi, Carulli, Saw, Giuliani. Just as in our own time, artists decided to be relevant, so they used ideas from what was popular at the time. Think about all of the classical pieces that use themes or motifs from popular operas. These operas contain different settings, characters, the star-crossed lovers taking their own lives, the court jester adding levity to the situation. In this spirit, I would like to talk about opera and how we can use ideas of the classical period to create opportunity in our own performance. The first thing I do when playing a classical piece is to assign each phrase an orchestral family: winds, string, brass, percussion. Does the phrase lend itself to a tutti section or a more soloistic approach? What color on the guitar do you wish to assign for each instrument? I know I like to assign the bassoon and low wind sound a very tusto sound right over the 12th fret. When you implement this, you can almost see an orchestral score materialize right before your very eyes. When Segovia says the guitar is an orchestra, I can't think of anything that can more clearly depict this. The introduction from Saul's variation on the theme of Mozart, Opus 9. Coincidentally, this piece is based from a Mozart opera, The Magic Flute. The introduction, the overture. Here we set our scene. We have the orchestra, the tutti section, grandiose, loud, and pronounced. Followed by a more soloistic section, perhaps the clarinets, tasto, warmer and softer. The beautiful Mozartian side figure with the resolution less. Next, the tutti for the chords. Then it's followed by some high winds, flute, oboes, the inclusion of a piccolo at the last set of grace notes. For the first time in this series, I will be addressing clarity of melody. We saw previously in the Renaissance and the Baroque that there was a certain distortion of the melodic line due to multiple lines sounding simultaneously. Here we have a clear division of melody versus accompaniment. A great starting point is to think about the idea of delineating these various layers by volume. Simply assign the melody as volume 3, the bass as volume 2, and the inner voices as volume 1. And the next section is a great way to highlight this. Additionally, you can hear the idea of crescendos and diminuendos. This has differed from the dynamics from the previous eras of music, which lended itself to more terrace dynamics, the loud and soft format, probably due to the limitations of the instruments themselves. The invention and enhancement of instruments helped enable more diversity in dynamic shaping. The next section displays yet another classical trait, as we hear all the little counter melodies within the chromatic section, the little fragments that interplay between different instruments. Experiment with sections like this. Try to imagine what tone color will represent what instrument or what sound you are trying to create. For instance, we have our first instrument, our second instrument, our next one, and then the fourth instrument. Of course, we can go through the rest of this introduction, the entire piece, and indeed most pieces from the classical period, using the same techniques that I've touched upon today. For me, this introduction explains the classical style. It is a perfect cross-section showing all of the different elements and how we can create a narrative. In the same Mozartian operatic fashion, Don Giovanni, the Marriage of Figaro, the Magic Flute, we hear that all too familiar chordal ending. It creates an air of suspense. The audience is at the edge of their seats. Now it's up to you to create the scene.
Hi, Alan Johnston here. wanted to talk about a concept that can be helpful for players at a variety of levels. A lot of times, especially beginning guitarists find that if they play a note here on the first string, that in order to get to a low string like 5 or 6, they end up arching the wrist and then reaching and hyperextending the third finger. But the concept that I want to talk about, I refer to as passive pressure. And so in order to gain independence between two adjacent fingers that share muscles up in the forearm, sometimes it's useful to use an alternative source of energy for one of the fingers so that the other one, relying on a separate source, can be independent. So as a preliminary to this, I would suggest that you practice this sort of exercise. I'm going to put my fourth finger on the first string, and then I'm going to just exert enough pressure with my fourth finger to get a nice sound as I bring my forearm and wrist in all the way and crunch the finger up against the neck like that, and then return. It's really important that your shoulder not be rising like that. That usually happens if your wrist is tight. So the wrist has to be absolutely flexible. So it's good to be able to do this with all the fingers, but especially with 4. So when you want to use what I call passive pressure, we're going to be using the lifting motion of the arm instead of this pressure that we normally use to hold the string down to the fret. So the way it works is if I just put my fourth finger on the wood and have my nail resting underneath the first string, when I bring my hand in close like this, you can hear that the nail is up against the string. So I'm exerting pressure on the string with this upward lifting motion of my arm, and you can see my wrist is flexible. So then when you get your finger actually on the string, you want to embed the string in the fleshy fingertip so that it creates resistance that allows you to do this again without the fourth finger escaping like that. You want to add enough pressure with this sort of backwards and upward lifting motion to just squish that finger in between your palm and the tip that's got the string embedded in it. So when I get to here, now I'm exerting pressure, but I'm not squeezing. And so now this third finger is free to go wherever it wants to. And things like this become much easier. You'll find at the beginning that in spite of applying these concepts, you may still find that this finger reflexively, that it just automatically flexes here. And I think it's important to learn how to ensure that that isn't happening. So you can reach with this hand and feel that knuckle as you practice slowly extending 3. So sometimes you need to take about 8 seconds to finally find the muscles that allow this finger to extend like that. This can be really helpful in chords like this, where you don't want to be like this, but you can instead just kind of lift in like this and relax your shoulder. In a situation like this, you can see that I pulled in like this and achieved those 2 notes like that instead of this, which works, especially if you bring your elbow out to the side, but it's not as comfortable, I don't think. So I think it's worth learning about this particular skill. That's probably enough for one short session. I hope you get some benefit from that.